All right, audience, hello. We're just about ready to go ahead and start recording. And I just wanted to say a real quick hi and hope that everybody is doing well for themselves. So, if you guys are all ready, let's go ahead and start. Hello and welcome to Holy Crap, the Phonecast, a call-in show dedicated to speaking with atheist curious communities about any topics they'd like in order to get an atheist's perspective. HCPC is a spin-off of Holy Crap, the Vlogcast. It records live on YouTube, Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. Today's episode was recorded on Tuesday, 8 July 2020. I am your host. I am known as Shujin Tribble, and you can call me on the show at 859-HCTV-554. That is 859-4288-554. For tonight's overall theme, I'm going to be talking about education from an atheist perspective. But of course, if there's any topic that you'd like to discuss, feel free to call into the show. I'll be more than happy to talk about that. And minor correction, my apologies. It is the 7th of July. I was looking at my computer's timer, which is set to UTC, so I was looking at the wrong date. Sorry. Anyway. So, hi everyone. It's good to be back with you again. I hope that everything is going well for you. Things are a little difficult, as you guys might imagine, out here in the areas of New York State that I'm in. I am way on the left-hand side, outside of Buffalo, which means I'm about as far away from Buffalo, New York as you can, away from New York City as you can get, and not have to cross the border, which is currently closed. But that's a whole other issue. Over on the live chat, by the way, for those of you that are participating live, thank you very much, TP. No worries. You take care of yourself, and I'll catch up with you a little bit later, man. So, I decided I was going to talk about education today because that's, I guess the nicest way of putting it is, it's kind of my pet project to complain about. I think it's probably the nicest way of putting it. Education is one of those things that it gets a bad rap several times over, and it's really not supposed to work that way, I think is the nicest way to put it. Education, unfortunately, over the decades, has been one of those things that has been relegated to being pushed further and further back, as in, we're not going to invest nearly as much into it as we had because why should we? You should be expected to get the job done with fewer resources, whether that be fewer teachers of worthy caliber, fewer books, fewer seats, more students. You get the idea. And that's something that has bothered me for a number of years. I will admit that I am 50 more, but you know, I don't feel that I missed out much in the line of education growing up. I was born in 1969, so for me, my educational career, if you can call it that, did not start with kindergarten. Preschool was not something that was really a thing back in the 70s. I mean, you had some places where kids could congregate, if your parents were, I don't know, bowling in a bowling league in the mornings. Yeah, not that anybody has that anymore, I don't think. But in any case, for me and a very large number of kids growing up, in the early 70s, we had a couple of TV shows that were very formative. I was born the same year that Sesame Street went on the air. I was born just after, if memory serves, Mr. Rogers started his career on air on TV. And Sesame Street was one of those things that was really, really important for kids growing up at the time. And there's a good reason why it became as important as it was. It's because it was researched. There was a lot of work that went into making sure that Sesame Street was going to be productive, that it was going to be helpful, and it was really intended for targeting the inner city youth. Unfortunately, that terminology is not great. There's a lot of baggage that goes along with that. The inner city youth was another way of putting it, where the disenfranchised kids were, the minorities. So at the time, it was the people of color. It was sometimes it was whoever it was that was being pushed down on at the time. So the black community, the Latino community. Fortunately, the Italian community was not quite looked at the same way at the time, but unfortunately, the history of New York City is rife with new waves of immigrants coming in who were thought to be less than desirable. It's probably the nicest way to put it. So the groups that TV shows like Sesame Street were really intended to assist were the ones who might have been in, let's call it, less... I can't remember what the right term is that I'm looking for. Less rich areas. Again, I'm using poor terminology for it. But the idea was that it was on public television, so that it would be the first step for helping kids who were the equivalent of pre-kindergarten, so that they would have a good start. They would have at least some way of learning while being entertained, which is one of the best ways of doing it, so that by the time they get to kindergarten or first grade, they've got various concepts that are going to be necessary. Counting, some minor bilingual abilities. Minor, but you get the idea. Actually seeing groups of people who are quite diverse interacting with each other. The idea of near and far. This thing is not like the others. You get the idea. But Sesame Street, like I said, it was one of those grand experiments, and it was a little bit of a dice roll. Even though the organization, before it was known as the Children's Television Network, they tried to make sure that they had as much information about education for kids as possible, so that they knew going in what it was that they needed to do, what they needed to accomplish, and how they were going to make that happen. It sounds easy after the fact, but this was a brand new thing. Fred Rogers, by the way, yes, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers. His full name was, for those of you that don't know, Fred McFeely Rogers. When he got started on TV, he was very upset that the vast majority of kids' TV at the time was hardly educational in any way. It was mostly drivel, blasé entertainment, very banal, shall we say, that relied almost exclusively on slapstick humor. Okay, considering some of the stuff that was going on at the time. Okay. Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, of course, took quite different ways as far as to how they were trying to accomplish what they were trying to accomplish. Mr. Rogers was much more concentrating on how to help the emotional side of us all, how to connect, how to interrelate with each other, how to understand ourselves, versus Sesame Street, which admittedly also handled parts of that, but there was a lot of stuff that was also external information. Like I said, counting, colors, concepts like near and far, pattern matching. So, for the kids growing up, like myself, back in the day, these two shows in particular, like I said, were very formative because we had the opportunity of learning in an environment that we didn't have to pay extra for, which was wonderful. And we learned from people who wanted to help us learn. And I say us meaning, well, I may not be a kid quite anymore, but, kids like me. So, back in the day, education for children was viewed very, very highly. It was important. It was worth doing a lot of research first and making sure that you knew what it was that you were going to be accomplishing. Back in the day, I remember that my parents had acquired, I still don't remember how, some Time Life books. Yeah, I know, some of you don't know what that is anymore, but Time Life magazine had a number of books that they put out, and one of them in particular that always held my attention was about the space program at the time. Now, reminding you that, I was a kid and, 1970, let's call it 1975. I'm 6 years old. And they had acquired these hard-covered books. And it was about the space program at the time, which, let's face it, there was still just the barest knowledge of the solar system and space flight at that point. I want to say humanity, but it really wasn't at the time, was it? We were able to be on the moon. We had a dozen people who were able to traverse the surface of the moon. And then that was it. I forget if it was actually a dozen, but, bear with me just a little bit. But at the time, I remember looking through and seeing the information about the planets as we knew them at the time. And most of these images that I looked at for the various planets, they were just artist representations. We didn't have any actual photographs. I mean, okay, yeah, there were some photographs of the Earth from the Apollo missions. There were photos available of the moon. But, like, close-up, if you will, photos of Mars or Saturn or Jupiter, nothing like what we could acquire now. I mean, they were okay. You consider some of the immense telescopes that are available can get some really amazing pictures, but, some of the stuff like Mercury, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, no, man, no, you just couldn't. We didn't have it available to us. And the statistics on these planetary bodies were, in some respects, just a bunch of question marks. We didn't really know anything about them at the time. So there were fields like the size, mass, atmosphere, composition of the planetary body were just question marks. And that was part of the thing that drove so many of us to learn more. What is that? I don't know. I want to learn what that is because that is an unknown. I want to know what that is. So, NASA at the time, of course, was charged with getting us forward to investigating further. Admittedly, they were pushed a lot by nationalistic interests of pride, but be that as it may, they were a scientific body. And they've done a lot over the intervening years. So, the idea of learning is something that the human species just does. Because there's always something new. There's always something up there. And I'm sorry about the sound of the computer. It's hot in the office. What can I tell you? So education, like I said, in the 70s was kind of important. It was seen as something that was important. And I do remember how it used to be that if you wanted to be successful, you went on from high school and you got a college education. And if you were able to do that, man, you were somebody important, somebody who was really strongly versed in whatever it was that you were trying to study, that you had some level of respect because you had some level of authority in a topic. Unfortunately, over the intervening years, that has changed a lot. The idea of how much money is put into the education system has dropped. And it's annoying. Because it shouldn't. It should never have. If anything, it should have continued on. And it should have been viewed as what it really is, a true investment in the newest lives coming up. You know, taxes are what we pay into the government so that the government can pool those resources for everyone for their benefit collectively. Now, taxes, unfortunately, are not the best way of doing it in a smaller community. Let me explain. If you're dealing with a community that is impoverished for whatever reason, could be any host of any number of items for any reason. But if the tax base is just not there, and the taxes are what goes towards the education system, well, that education system doesn't have a lot to work with. And that's just a detriment to the kids. They grow up through whatever it is that they can. They try to learn the best that they can. And reminding you that at the time, this was when microfiche was still the way to go, where computers, such as we know them today, would be supercomputers. The computers that we had at the time, when I was in junior high school in the early 80s, well, that was the Commodore PET. Loaded programs up, loaded off of audio cassette tapes. And for anybody that's looking at it and going, what? Yeah, things change. So you need to have a much larger collection of money, no matter how you do it, in order to be a proper investment for the children, because they're the ones who will eventually take over, whether you like it or not. And that's part of the problem. We don't really, over the years, we don't really view it as an investment in people. A buddy of mine taught me a long time ago. Unfortunately, he's since passed. He taught me that Children. The only thing different between a child and an adult is how much they've learned and how much memory they have. It's all about how much experience. So children don't know what they're not going to know, meaning they have no way of knowing all the things that they don't know about. I mean, in third grade, did you have any idea what the quadratic equation was? Or how to do long division? Or how to work with fractions and decimal points? Most of us didn't even consider how to work with the metric system, for crying out loud. I got lucky. Back in the day, we wanted to do the metric system. But that got kind of pulled out from under our feet by Congress at the time because they didn't like that weird peanut farmer guy. But am I bitter? Yes. Yes, I am. Because it was just silly. Trying to teach kids that you need to remember for the major distance measurement that we use, it's 5,000 plus feet. It's not even a round number. But you go on the metric system, how far is the first major distance? 1 kilometer. How far is that? It's 1,000 meters. It's easy. The powers of 10. But, what do I know? I grew up with the imperial system because, well, American exceptionalism. So if you'd like to call in and talk with me a little bit further about this stuff, please, of course, feel free. 859-HCTV-554, 859-4288-554. So, like I was saying, if you've got the money coming in for a school district, specifically from local taxes only, you run into a problem. For whatever reason, you can have a school district that is woefully underfunded or hilariously overfunded. And the ones that have much more money have far more and better quality resources. So there is a huge inequality built into a system that way. And you don't have to have a degree in mathematics or in economics in order to see that. If you've got a pool that's only got 100 units that you can take from versus another pool that's got 500, well, obviously you've got more from the 500 that you can take. It's literally as simple as that. That's why school districts should not be using money from just the localities. That kind of money needs to get pooled on a much larger basis. And this is one of those areas where some people would probably get very upset with me. I am of the opinion that primary and secondary education, grammar school, middle to high school, it should have a national standard. It should be nationally developed and implemented. Meaning that if you are in this country, if you're a child and you grow up here, you should be on par with knowledge with everyone else at the same grade level. Now, it's not to say that you can't expand above, but there needs to be an actual baseline that says this is what a kid at grade level whatever should know. And they should show proficiency in this. They must. So that by the time you get out of high school, if you graduated from high school, and would really like that to be the case, that you would then have the knowledge necessary to be able to keep you productive for yourself and for your community for years to come. Yeah, I know. The idea of everybody going off to college or a trade school is something that makes sense. But again, it's another one of those things where you need the money to make the money. That's why there are a number of countries out there that say, hey, post-secondary, college, first 2 years, first 4 years of college, pay it with taxes. This way, you get done through your formative years at arguably 18 years of age. And then you finally decide for yourself, what is it that you really want to do? What is it that you really want to have a concentration in? What do you want to learn how to be proficient in? Learn that. And then you pay into the system, just like everybody else. You got yourself a kickstart, and a bunch of other people get it from all of that too. It's a system that makes sense to me. Now, admittedly, I will end up hearing arguments about the whole, well, education should come down to each of the individual states. We've got a problem with that because there is an immense amount of baggage that goes along with that. In Japan, as an example, one of the places that I was fortunate enough to visit once upon a time ago, the idea of these national standards is the way things work. Every prefecture has its own, border, but it's all one country as far as the education system is concerned. Yes, there are tests that we don't do nearly the same way. So there are placement exams to try to get into more prestigious schools moving forward. So there's a lot of drive, a lot of personal drive to get into a better school with higher grades and better testing. But when all is said and done, it is the education system of Japan. North to south. Or south to north. Doesn't really much matter. Either way, gets to the same place. But here in the United States, so many of these, and admittedly, we have a very large country. These education systems are governed by the localities, which are kind of beholden to their counties, which are then kind of beholden to the individual states' capitals and the education system built into there. It's, for lack of a better way of putting it, from what I've understood from the outside, and admittedly, I'm on the outside, a lot of this tends to be very loosey-goosey, which is annoying to me. Because I would like to know that my kid is going to know what another kid is going to know. And yeah, some people are going to be very unhappy about the whole homogeneity of the whole thing, and I really hope I got the right word there. But we are, when all is said and done, we are one country. And we are supposed to be one people. So many different facets of who we are. So many different backgrounds, religious faiths, or none, of course, skin color, family history. We have so many different things. And yet, as far as education is concerned, some are highly privileged with all of the breaks, and some aren't. And they have to deal with not knowing what it is that they're doing. For me, it's sad. I think I grew up pretty well. I came through, like I said, I graduated in 1987. Yes, I know. The big hair, the platform shoes, and Kiss back when they still had their makeup. I know, yeah, shut up, whatever. But I was lucky. I lived on Long Island, which is admittedly, for the most part, just one big suburb of New York City. But I never felt that I was really hard pressed as far as education was concerned. I never thought that we were in, bad shape for what we had. Yeah, books, books were, well, books are always expensive. But, books, some books you could get away with, going 5 years. I mean, there are certain things that don't really change that much. Mathematics, for the most part, until you're dealing with, heavy concepts, mathematics doesn't really change very much. Fortunately, we've got a really good idea as to how that works. Reading, comprehension, spelling, again, for the most part, that doesn't change very much. The sciences, well, that changes a lot. And it really has over the intervening years. To give you an idea, I was born the same year as the first laser was produced. Think about that a second. I am as old as the laser. And now we use lasers for, engraving into various different materials. You can use it for actually stripping away rust from metal, which, let me tell you, that's a heady concept to me. And of course, we use it for music playback these days. I use it for some playback these days with CDs. And of course, that's expanded into video discs, Laserdisc, DVD. And lasers have been used for slowing down and cooling atoms to fractions of a Kelvin above absolute zero. Michael Faraday, for which there is the Faraday is actually an electrical term. It's a unit of anyway. He was the one who showed that there was a direct correlation, a direct link between magnetism and electricity. He passed a bar magnet through a coil of wires and ran that wire around a compass. And he showed that when he passed the magnet back and forth through the coil, it affected the compass so that it deflected the magnetic attraction. And people asked him, Dr. Faraday, what good is this? I don't know. But it's not for me to figure out what to do with it. My job was to find out. It's up to the new generations to discover what to do with this knowledge. He learned something that today we completely take it for granted. You are listening to me, or conversely watching me, due to the knowledge of how electromagnetism operates. Magnetic storage, magnetic transmission, electromagnetic waves for radio. That's all AM and FM radio is. Of course, AM radio is a really, really strange beast, but ask me about that another time, and I'll give you something to think about with that. So, we learn what we learn because, as the expression goes, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And we get a new perspective from each of those. We learn something new, we go on, and we survey the landscape from where we've been able to see at that point. And then find out what's over there. I can't see over there. I want to know what's over there. What's over there next? I want to learn. That's something that I find fascinating. I love to learn something new. There are times where it is admittedly a little humbling, which is annoying, because sometimes I have to take my stuff from what I've thought before, set it aside, and just unlearn what I had learned before, because I was taught wrong. You know, there are certain things that I took for granted when I was a kid, and it turned out that I didn't know correctly. Such as life. We learn. We go on. We learn. To put in perspective with the stuff that we've got today, I had no idea how. Well, I had no idea how television worked once upon a time. I learned afterwards that it works through a process of magnetic deflection of a bunch of electric particles hitting on a glass screen with phosphors on it. Yeah, I know, I'm talking about the old black and white TVs once upon a time ago. I had no idea that that's the way that it worked. And then I found out years later how color televisions work in similar methodologies. And then flat screen TVs and monitors started to happen, and they used different technologies. And I love it. I'm fascinated by it. Not just monitors, but the methodology that goes into them. How they are built, why they work, how they work. You know, it's amazing to me. Back in the day, if you wanted to fix up an automobile, back in the 70s and early 80s, you know, everything was done by a machine. I know, cars are machines. Just bear with me a second. The engines and everything that operated them, except for the lights, the radio, if you were lucky, the electric windows, the air conditioner or fan, a tape player, usually a 8-track. It was all operated through specific timing of the engine itself. There were no electronics that went into how the pistons were supposed to operate, or how the fuel was supposed to get mixed into the combustion chamber, or how to regulate voltage on the spark plugs. I don't know that actually happens right now. I don't know. Anyway. But it was all based off of the timing of the mechanism. You could think of it in the same kind of terms as, well, a watch. An old grandfather clock, for instance. It's a relatively large piece. It's got the pendulum swinging underneath it to continue the energy that goes into it. But it's a whole bunch of cogs and wheels and flywheels and interconnected gears. And they go in a certain pattern in order to do a very specific function. And these things were, in some cases they were very accurate. Not nearly as accurate as the stuff that we use today, of course, but they were pretty good. They did a good job. And those engines at the time, like I said, they did the same thing. There were certain things that you could change the variables on. Like if you, just like with today, the more you press on the gas pedal, well, the more the engine is going to want to have power. But, these days it works via computer. So if you want to try to tinker with all the stuff, you have to have some kind of knowledge of the electronics that goes into it. Back in the day, you needed to have a lot more knowledge about how the mechanisms all interrelated to each other. It was much different. I can't say that it was better, but it was different. It was a lot more accessible because it didn't require nearly as much long-term learning and investment in learning. Because in the day, you could actually literally open up an engine, take it apart, put it back together again, if you had the right tools and the patience. And if there was something that was wrong with it, you could probably easily figure out what it was with, again, some patience and the right tools. But there was virtually nothing that was the quote-unquote black box system. The black box system being the idea that there is a box. It is black. It is black. It is large. And you can't see what goes into it. You can't see what comes out of it. But the black box does all the magical stuff. Now these days, that's the electronic brains of the cars. And it takes a lot more to try to understand those and specialized equipment in order to tinker with any of that, with the very real possibility that you could, brick it, and that would be a really bad idea. Versus, if you did something wrong with an engine back in the day, there's the possibility that you could have done something really wrong, but you'd be able to hear very quickly, very easily, what was not working right. Maybe there's a vacuum hose that wasn't connected, so you could just hear that shouldn't be there. Maybe you'll hear you'll feel the entire engine shimmying in a way that it shouldn't because the cylinders are not all firing. Or they're firing out of order. Or not firing at all. But that involved a little bit of learning. And it's something that you could do, like I said, relatively easily because it was just right there. Very little that you needed to really do a lot in the line of higher education being necessary. These days, with the way that the silicon revolution has happened, that's much more necessary in a lot of different fields. There are a lot of things that are still pretty much the same. I mean, like I said before, math is still math. So if you want to learn how to be a bookkeeper, the math that's involved in all that is still pretty much the same. If you wanted to be a writer, that gets a little complicated because there's a lot more creativity that's necessary. But words are still words. So long as you've got a good handle on those and you know how to use them, well, the idea of becoming a writer is still pretty good. These days, if you wanted to be a TV content producer or radio producer, for instance, you've got the ability of doing it with a lot more flexibility these days. The Silicon Revolution has allowed us to be able to do a lot of these things. For example, for me, I invested in a mixer board and and apparently I have a phone call coming in. Let's see how this works over here. Hello, this is Shujin from HCTV. Who's this? Apparently they hung up. Well, missed phone call. All right, whatever. It'll be fine. Chances are it's probably going to be a spam call anyway. Whatever. We'll deal with that another time. Such is what it is. Anyway. So, amongst the other things that that we want to do for creating content for people, what we can do these days is positively unthinkable some 30 years ago. One of the biggest transitions that was happening was back in the mid-90s when a little company known as New Tech came on the scene, and they were producing a little package called the Video Toaster. Now, the Video Toaster, the whole idea of it was to create a system whereby if you had at the time, a relatively high-end computer, the Amiga computer specifically is what it was called. For those of you that don't know about it, the Commodore Amiga was a pretty good computer. I loved mine. But in any case, if you had a 2000 model, 3000 model, or 4000 model, and preferably the 4000, depending, if you paired that up with the Video Toaster, you could use that and a couple of video cameras and a video deck. You could have the equivalent of an actual commercial television studio setup for just a couple of $1,000s. Whereas the studio boards in a TV station could easily run you tens of thousands of dollars. Easily. And that's just the video board itself. It doesn't include cameras. It doesn't include any audio systems. It doesn't include titling systems, like what I've got on my videos right now, which is something that's just built right into the program that I use to stream. But the commercial aspect, as in being able to buy the stuff at the consumer or the prosumer level, was there, and it was available, and it started what they called video revolution. Yes, you did have to learn the new stuff, but again, at the same time, a lot of it was just playing with the stuff. Very, very difficult to actually break anything back in the day. At least electronic. Programming is real difficult to break stuff from a user level. But then learning how to actually build those programs, that wasn't always easy. But we still had some stuff that we could learn how to do that. Again, going back to the 70s and the early 80s, the Commodore 64 was the first computer that I ever had. It was not exactly what you would call a beast by any stretch of the imagination, but it was good. It gave you Commodore Basic and it gave you a book that explained here are all the commands, and here is how you write programs, and gave examples, and helped you learn. Now, obviously, it's almost impossible to find a Commodore 64 anymore, and of course, programs written for it are, well, not useful any longer. But taking the time to learn how to do this, what goes into programming, that was important. And that, to me, again, is the investment. It's the investment in time. Because we as kids, we wanted to learn this stuff. And when you have somebody, if you've got a kid that says, I want to learn about, you should nurture that. People should have the opportunity to learn this stuff. And I really hope that those of you that are adults get the opportunity to do that also for yourselves. Because, I mean, let's face it, we don't stop learning. I want to keep learning because I ain't dead yet. So we need to go ahead and get on out of here. So thank you very much for being with me. If you'd like to be part of the show next time, please join me on YouTube Tuesday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. HCPC extends a very large thank you to the staff at KTQA 95.3 FM Tacoma for time on their airwaves. Keep up the great work, guys. Our show's theme song is Loopster by Kevin MacLeod and is used with permission from Incompetech.com. On behalf of all of us from HCTV, I wish you all the peace I no longer have. I wish you the strength that I've learned. I wish you well. And of course, for my lady, 15 years on, I am still in love with you. Matane Fujin. I love you. I miss you. Dream of me. Until our next conversation, all, good night. And there we go. Somebody tried to call. Well, that was just... Oh. Still the same phone number. Well, I will deal with that in a little bit. Anyway, those of you that took the time to watch, thank you very kindly. You have yourselves a good week. I will be back again next week. And until that time, like I said, stay safe. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.